And we are back. Today's video will be a compilation of long-term updates for many completed projects. Starting with the windlass that I installed, which isn't exactly long-term since I just did this. But I did a comment on the bow roller, which I reconfigured. Strangely enough, that comment's no longer there. I'm not sure if it was deleted or if YouTube is playing tricks on me. But the comment was in regards to I had only had two screws holding the bow roller, which actually held, but I did go ahead and reinforce it with an additional two here through the fiberglass, and that's essentially what I had prior to this, and it held for decades and literally hundreds of nights at anchor. So I'm very confident that that's fine. I mean, I could probably shorten it, bring it in more, but then that would be more risky with the point of the anchor hitting the hull. And really there's no other option, because the inside of the hull is actually kind of like right here. So these are as close to the hull as I can get. And the other part of that comment was that the bow roller was flexing and moving around, which was not the case. I mean, if you watch the video, it's actually the boat was bouncing up and down on the trailer. So I think this is good to go. And on the same note, I made a better lanyard to hold the anchor in case it jumps off the windlass when sailing. So it is made from stainless cable and a pretty beefy snap shackle. So towards the beginning of this refit, I rehabbed this aluminum bilge pump. Was actually set up to pump out my holding tank. And I kind of messed with the valves here. I made this little high density polyethylene piece, and that was fine, but I also coated the inside of the pump and any perforations with epoxy, but that proved to be futile after so many years. I mean, you can see it actually rotted right through. I don't think aluminum pumps are suited to this type of application where water is going to be sitting in it. So I upgraded to a plastic pump. This one actually is kind of the same footprint as this, but it won't rot the same way. Here it is installed. There is the handle where I keep the handle for it, and here's the cover and lid where you stick the handle in to pump it out. Last year I made this Bimini, and for the frame I needed to cut it open in the front to get the backstay through, and to rejoin it I just kind of slid a piece of tubing over that, and it held itself with friction. And I only did that because I could not get one of these in the correct size. This is kind of the type that you would use to join it, and you just kind of tighten the screws. However, what I ended up doing is just getting some of that tubing and epoxying it to here in order for it to shim it out to the proper size. And that is much better in fit and appearance. On the last follow-up video, I mentioned that my diesel heater, the Chinese diesel heater, had failed after about 2 or so years. And I just want to mention that it was not the heater's fault. It was actually my fault. At some point I must have killed the power rather than letting it go through the shutdown and cool down procedure. So what I did to prevent that is install one of these little covers to keep me from accidentally hitting that switch. So I got the new one installed. I mean, the new one cost $40, shipping included. So these things are about as cheap as they come, and that's been great all winter. Also, I had to just replace the screen. This is the old one. That's the new one, because they use a newer style screen. So this was just plug and play. The new unit, it was just a drop-in. Probably took me 20 minutes to put in. Other than that, the ducting, the original expandable aluminum ducting that I had used, not quite up to the rigors of this boat. So I replaced that with this blue polyethylene type, which I got from Defender, and so far that's been great. I mean, it's not going to dent, it's flexible, and it's certainly not going to rust, so we're in good shape there. And on a similar note, I do have this Dickinson Newport diesel heater on hand and all of the accessories needed to install it, and I did play around with the location of this, but for now I'm going to stick with the Chinese unit. If I did end up using this at some point, I'll need to build a shelf and do a lot of heat shielding, because it'd be pretty close to the ceiling, so extra heat shielding and insulation would be required. And last year around this time, I actually installed a simple solar system. And since then, I have added a second panel. It's actually slightly smaller than the first, even though they're both 50 watts, because this one is a monocrystalline and the other one is polycrystalline. This one's a little bit more efficient, I noticed. So installation, relatively straightforward. Just ran the wiring down through its own cable clamp, similar to the other one, and then spliced them in together, and that was no problem. One other improvement here, I put on these little footman loops in order to keep the panel stable when it's facing upwards. This is actually an old sail tie with some buckles on it, which helps me to hold this when I'm tightening this in order to hold this. So I won't ever need a prop rod doing it that way. Next is the boarding ladder that I installed. And originally I had this little plastic clip kind of holding it on there. That proved to be okay. At one point I was sailing heeled over and this was kind of in the water. It didn't deploy fully because of the bungee. But what I did was to make a kind of a breakaway piece, similar to what I did for the weather cloths that I made. So you just push this down and then that piece kind of breaks away. It's just a piece of cord with a cord lock on one end. And it's able to break away and you won't lose the cord lock. I had recently replaced my vinyl coated Lifelines for some uncoated ones. But I had used 1/8 inch stainless, uncoated stainless. Decided that was a little bit too thin and then upgraded to this 3/16 one, which really looks good, and I'm much happier with this instead of the 1/8. And here's the 1/8 next to it. You can actually, I'm not sure if it's how obvious it is, but it's much much thinner than the 3/16. And related to the Lifelines are the projects that I did with the stanchions recently, namely the one where I used some thin wall tubing to replace those plastic grommets where the lifeline passes through. So originally I just had done the tops, but now I had done the bottoms also. And this was actually a necessary part of the lightning grounding and bonding system. So I have a copper ground plate on the keel, which the mast is grounded to, but also have lots of wires that are connecting large pieces of metal to bond them to that grounding plate also. And I do have a wire coming up to the bottom of this stanchion right here, connected to the bottom. So the Lifelines will actually now contact all of the stanchions, so they will be bound or bonded too. Way back when I rebuilt the galley, I built this hinged chart table over the stove, but that also covers an ice box. And the original intention of that was to install a cooling plate in there to make a electric refrigerator type. But I've since gone a different direction. I've got this standalone unit, which will mainly live here when sailing. It could be moved to another area of the boat wherever there's an outlet. And I did install outlets here. Here's a cigarette lighter type, and this is just USB. But that'll power that. And so far with testing, it's gone well. I'm going to make this strap much longer to kind of go around and hold it against the bulkhead. And this is a freezer and a refrigerator, depending on what temperature you set it at. And now the galley pump. So when I first bought this, it was used. I was able to kind of rehabilitate it. There was a cork seal in there, and I just would soak that to kind of bring it back. I have since replaced that seal with a nitrile seal, which is a little bit firmer, but it won't dry out the way that one will. Also, I was having a problem with the filter, the water filter that I had in line. With a pump, it was a little bit, it wouldn't really work. It would you kind of lift it and then this would kick back. So I've since replaced that with a similar filter, just smaller, and now it works good. So no problem. And the last one was quite easy. So every year I've had to revarnish my tiller. And it was a clear varnish, but it would never last very long no matter what I use. So this time I've used Cetol, which is the same stuff I use on the teak caps there on the gunnels. And it's taken on a little bit of an amber tone. I actually used 7 coats on this, so I think that'll work, but I'm going to monitor that as well.